You can hear it between the static. My voice, barely steady, coming out of a little dynamo that smells of oil and burned insulation. I don't hide from the truth. The world I remember is gone. The sky stopped being sky. It became a bruise. For years now, the light has been the color of old metal and fried paper. A constant thin heat that presses down until you can feel the outline of your bones. The wind learned to sleep. We call that silence the vanishing. Water is the first thing to go. Rivers that used to run like clocks are nothing but teeth of cracked mud. The river that cut the city in half, the one with the old stone bridge where people used to toss coins and wishes, is a scar. Boats sit on their bellies in dust like beached animals. Where lakes used to mirror the sky, there are salt flats and pale crusts that taste of iron when you lick them to test for thirst. Rain has become rumor. When it happens now, it's acidic and fast. An angry wash that strips paint and patience in equal measure. Fire taught the map new lines. Forests have learned to stand in black. The tree line is a ragged crown of stumps and ash, and the smell of wood fires used to mean warmth. Now it means cities burning and people running. Whole neighborhoods went up like kindling during the long years of heat. Some places never recovered. Roofs caved and never rose again. The skyline is jagged with skeletons. Office towers peeled open like tin cans. Stadiums caved in and flooded with sand. Suburbs look like museums of abandonment, toys half buried, a child's bicycle with a sun-baked seat. You could walk those streets and read someone's life in the dust. The temperature has become its own tyranny. Summers stretch like taut wire. They break you slowly, in small, irreversible ways. Nights no longer bring relief. The heat soaks into walls and holds you like an unkind memory. Winters are not the consolation they used to be. They come sharp and savage, whipping the brittle landscape with cold so pure it snaps things. Pipes, hopes, the cheap plastic of survival gear. The weather is not seasonal anymore. It is erratic and cruel, swinging from blistering droughts to flash floods that shred everything they touch. Cities dissolved in stages. Governments, the big cold machinery of order, faltered when the fuel ran out and the supply chains broke. At first they rationed and relocated. Then, when the trucks stopped arriving and the lights went out, the voices in the suits were gone. Officers traded their badges for food and left their precincts to rot. What remains of law and order are small and local. Barricades, hand-drawn signs offering water. Volunteer doctors who learn to stitch with twine and prayer. Somewhere between the absence of authority and the arrival of hunger, men and women learned to take what they needed by force. Survivor groups assembled like barnacles on the hull of the world. Barter towns built around wells. Communes on the edges of old farms trying to coax soil into life again. And the kind of gangs that move like storms. Fast, violent, and hungry. There are traders who run courier lines between enclaves, risking dust and gunfire to carry seeds and batteries like precious contraband. Then there are the scavengers, the people whose business it is to pick through the bones of civilization. They are neither honorable nor villainous. They are what necessity teaches. Quick, practical, mostly silent. Hospitals are churches now, their operating rooms converted into shelters, their basements stacked with tins and faded blankets. Schools host night watches and seed banks. Libraries are the strange altars of memory. People come to the stacks to remember what was, or to learn old ways of fixing what remains. Once proud institutions exist only in fragments. Radio stations with cracked transmitters. A university lab with a solar array jury-rigged to a freezer that's now full of rationed medicine. There are pockets of order, but all are fragile, threaded together by goodwill and the thin paper of improvisation. Fuel is a myth for most. Diesel and petrol are currency you spend once and then have to swear to forget. Generators are gold, and the person who owns one is both king and target. Solar keeps a few lights on where panels survived, but dust coats everything and turns sun into a weak promise. In many places, the hum of old machines has been replaced by human rhythm. Water hauled in buckets, crops planted with hands that remember a different life, radios wound by elbow cranks in the back rooms of ruined cafes. Communication is a thread we cling to. Broadcasts like this one feel like lifelines, a way to mark that someone else is still breathing on the same planet. We listen for news of caravans, for rumors of a working reservoir, for names. Names mean people. Names mean memory. They are currency as much as canned beans. The network is ragged. Shortwave radios, hand-cranked transmitters, messages scrawled on walls in safe houses. Where once we checked feeds and feeds checked us back, now a single voice on a static-filled band can be the difference between hope and surrender. And under it all, the dust. The fire, the slow theft of history, there is a constant undercurrent of waiting. We wait for the next dust storm that will carve the city anew. We wait for the next shipment, the rumored convoy. We wait for someone to call and say, "We found water." The feeling is a tightness just behind the ribs, an anticipatory fear that keeps you half awake. There is also anger, of course, at the architects of this collapse, at the slow betrayals, at the invisible markets, and the quiet complicity. But anger is heavy. It is easier to carry hope, however small, and pass it along like a precious glass bottle of clean water. This is where we live now, in the cracks between what was and what might be. The landscape is honest in its ruin. It tells us the price of disregard in the plainest terms. Hunger, thirst, sun-bleached bones. And yet, in shallow courtyards and under patched tarps, people still plant seeds, trade stories, mend radios. We hunch against the vanishing of the wind and speak into whatever microphone we can afford, because as long as someone answers, the world has not completely stopped listening. They call me a few things over the band. The voice, old Mike, the radio man. Mostly they call me by static and silence, by the long pauses between transmissions when nothing answers back. I answer anyway. Habit is a kind of prayer now, and the microphone is the only altar I have left. Before the vanishing, I was someone else. Names pile up like bus tickets in a pocket. Michael Reyes, systems technician, husband, maybe a father for a while. There are photographs buried in an underground crate I haven't opened. Sometimes I dream I open it and the faces are still clear. Other times the photos are ash. The life that was is kept in small rituals. Tightening the bolt on a generator, rewinding the crank on a transmitter, retuning a receiver until a ghost becomes a neighbor. Those rituals stitch me to the past and anchor me to the people who might still be out there. Surviving is work. It's a list of low, constant tasks that don't end because there is no end. My day begins before the sun burns the sky into a flat sheet of white. I check the cistern first. Covered, shallow, shaded by a rusted awning and wrapped in a tarp that used to be the roof of a bakery. We collect what little we can. Condensation from tarps, the dew trapped on canvas. Water salvaged from a municipal line that still drips when you coax it. I filter with layers of cloth and charcoal. I boil when I can. When fuel is too precious, I drop the water onto hot stones to pasteurize it. Slow, careful, a process that teaches patience the way hunger teaches humility. Food comes from three sources: barter, memory, and stubborn gardens. I keep a library of seeds, tomato, basil, amaranth, wrapped in wax paper and labeled in a shaky hand. I traded the last of my mother's silver for them once. People laugh at seeds until they remember what a living thing tastes like. I tend a courtyard plot under a jury-rigged shade cloth, drip lines made from old tubing, compost dug from the churchyard, water measured out like treasure. For protein, I trap small game when there is game to be had, and foraged what others call weeds, edible roots, and plants that smell like survival. There is a science to drying meat in this heat, a patience to curing it so flies can't lay down and colonize your pantry. I teach these things on air when time allows. Practical knowledge is as valuable as canned peaches. Shelter is less glamorous. My house is a stack of corrugated metal, plywood, and hope. I reinforce the windows with sandbags and tar. I sleep on a pallet with a blanket that has been mended so many times the thread has its own history. Rain comes with the threat of rust and rot. Wind comes queer and silent. But when it arrives, it carries grit sharp enough to sand your teeth. I keep a fire pit for heat when nights go cold, and a small stove carved from a water heater drum. I trade a jar of preserved peaches for a can of kerosene sometimes, but the real work is the transmitter. The radio keeps us talking. I maintain an old tube transmitter that runs on a combination of scavenged capacitors and the stubborn muscle in my arm when the generator sleeps. I know the frequencies that caravans prefer, the tones that indicate friendly hands, the signature cough of a woman in a market who runs a relay in the morning. The generator is a beast that eats oil and coughs back life. I patch it, I prime it, I argue with it like a father with a wayward son. I teach anyone who will listen to solder and splice, to hold a microphone steady, to speak so that their words don't get eaten by the static. Because once you can speak, you can ask for help. Once you can ask, you can receive a name. What drives me is a small, painful combination of duty and the ache for connection. There are nights when the weight of loss presses so hard I could sink into it and never rise. On those nights, a child's voice on the line will cut right through me. "Mike," they'll say, "this is Carla from the irrigation camp," and something unclenches. Responsibility is a stubborn thing. At the old station, before the city folded, I signed an agreement to keep the lights on, literal and metaphorical. I turned that into an oath after everyone left. I am not the only one who remembers how to keep a transmitter from becoming a tombstone. When someone tunes in, they expect a steady voice. They expect details about water, news of convoys, warnings about roving gangs. They expect a recipe for fixing a solar controller with nothing but a pair of pliers and bad luck. And I give it to them because there is a moral geometry to being a voice. People orient toward it like a compass. Loss is a language I speak without an accent. I speak of the house that burned on the third summer, of the pantry where the last of my mother's preserves turned bad when the freezer died, of the neighbor who walked out one dawn and never returned. Some losses are ordinary, things like shoes and a record collection, and some are jagged and permanent. My daughter Lena was small and loved to press her ear against the radio to hear my voice. She learned words from static. "Hold on, we'll find. Listen." When the floods took the east neighborhood, I kept the broadcast that night like a prayer, calling names into the dark until my throat split. I found her backpack months later, a broken plastic toy inside. People talk about grief as if it is a single thing you can carry slowly. Grief in this world is more like water seeping through a foundation, destroying the supports until the structure settles. Guilt lives next to me. I am guilty for surviving some days. I'm guilty for staying when it would have been easier to run. I have friends I left behind because the road was too dangerous, or because I misjudged the timing of a storm, or because we argued and the argument held us apart like a locked gate. Guilt sharpens decisions and makes them permanent. I'm learning to live with it like a second shadow. But there is tenderness too. We are capable of small humane things that no one predicts in history books. I know the names of the people who come by for water. Old Mags with her tin cup. Ravi the mechanic who can fix anything with a piece of rebar. The twins who run messages between camps and trade jokes for batteries. There is Anna, who taught herself to sew from a mismatched stack of manuals, and now patches up our clothes and our spirits both. I have a radio friend in a town 3 valleys over. We trade recipes and weather reports and sometimes music. Once, on a moonless night, someone sang into the mic. For a few minutes, the world wasn't all ash and schedules. It was a living room with a guitar. Trust is a currency we spend carefully. People will test you. They'll try to take your generator, barter with half-truths, or trade poisoned promises for shelter. But there are still alliances forged in barter and necessity. I've struck pacts with a farmer who gives me eggs in exchange for weather readings I can forecast with my scratched barometer and an old almanac. We made a system, I report, he plans. We keep each other alive by making our needs transparent, by the slow, stubborn practice of reciprocity. Hope is not what you think. It is not big or triumphant. It is a string of small, deliberate acts. Hope is an extra cup of water shared. Hope is teaching a child to plant a seed and watching her eyes track the sprout. Hope is trying to repair a solar cell until your fingers sting and your thumbs grow calloused. Hope is keeping the transmitter warm at night, so someone, someday, might hear a voice that says, "We made it through another day." I am not naive. I have seen the worst. Marauders who turned a village into a rumor. Diseases that spread from careless camps. The slow corrosion of morality when food runs out. I also know that people are not only harm. There is an enormous reserve of kindness that reveals itself when you least expect it. My role, as I understand it, is to hold that reservoir open, to be a conduit for information and for memory. Memory is a weapon and a bomb. If we forget how to sew, we die. If we forget why we once loved each other, we die in a different way. At night, when the wind is a soft absence and the generator finally hushes, I sit with a notebook and write names. Names are how I keep the dead from vanishing entirely. I keep logs of weather, lists of parts scavenged, the frequency of thunderstorms, the prices people barter for a crate of batteries. I tape messages people leave on a corkboard, shouts into the void that sometimes become signals. The next morning, I will read those names into the microphone. A voice answers sometimes. When it does, the world tilts back toward its axis. You can hear it in my voice. There is weariness, yes. And there is also a kind of stubborn music. The vanishing of the wind took a lot, but it did not take everything. It did not take our capacity to be small and brave, to wring meaning from the raw material of life. I will go on because the microphone is lighter in my hands than the weight of what I've lost. And because someone out there might still need to hear the sound of another living person saying, explicitly and plainly, "You're not alone." They began calling it the long dry in the beginning, as if naming it would make it a thing you could file under a headline and move past. The name never fit. What we got was not one long season, but a cascade of failures. Snowpacks that didn't refill the rivers, seas that warmed and hugged the land with new moods, soil that forgot how to sponge. At first it was just a strange year, then 3 strange years, then a decade of wrong weather. Now we call it what it is, a shift in the rules. The immediate crisis, the thing that keeps me awake and makes my throat ache when I speak into the mic, is water. The simple, honest fact that the planet we depended on has fewer places to give it to us. The wells that supported whole neighborhoods now breathe only dust. The cisterns slosh with half measures. Even the rain that returns is violent and short. It rushes off baked ground and takes topsoil with it, creating floods that look like punishment after drought. We get a hit of water, and then a silence, and the land only remembers how to reject that mercy. There's a logic to how it broke, and I learned some of it from a scientist who tuned in one night. Dr. Hassan, if you ever hear him, listen. He said it's a compound problem. Higher sea surface temperatures mean more energy for storms, but changes in the jet stream and polar warming have parked those storms in new places or prevented them from forming at all. Snowpacks retreat because winters warm at the edges first. Mountains that used to melt in rhythm with spring simply stop releasing water in time for the growing season. Groundwater, the thing people used when surface water failed, was pulled out fast, pumps running day and night for years until the aquifers fell silent. Then comes salinization in coastal aquifers, and the last reliable wells taste vaguely of the sea. That's the science I can repeat on air when I have a calm mouth. But the science is not enough. The science explains cause. It doesn't show you how to patch a leaking cistern at midnight while dust is hammering the tin roof. It doesn't tell you how to choose which neighbor gets the last bottle of water when a convoy is late. The crisis is a problem of physics married to human scarcity and the errors of old systems. Infrastructure that was never built to be resilient to this kind of shock. Markets that moved resources away from places that needed them. And decision makers who treated warnings like forecasts. Interesting, perhaps, but not worth changing the world for. Survival is becoming harder every day because everything that used to cushion us has been thinned. Food chains are broken. Pollinators that used to visit gardens are fewer. Early heat-killed nests and pesticide-scarred landscapes don't help. Crop yields collapse without steady water. What grows is often weak, stunted. Fuel is scarce. The truck that once brought seed and fertilizer is either buried under a collapsed overpass or taken by a band that prefers bullets to barter. Energy systems that depended on continuous supply lines now sputter in and out. Solar panels work sometimes, but dust reduces their efficiency and the controllers fail. Batteries degrade faster than we can replace them. The human cost of this physical breakdown is uglier. Economies that relied on cheap, abundant resources have imploded. Social contracts fray. People are driven to travel farther just to get what used to be around the corner. Exposure increases the risk of violence and sickness. Communities fracture when their reserves thin, and rumor of a water source travels faster than a caravan. Desperation sharpens into aggression. We used to worry about crime as a pathology. Now it is a survival strategy for some. I've had close calls. Once a scavenger party found the courtyard garden and returned with fire in their eyes. They were young men with more hunger than patience. I could have radioed for help, but doing so would have sent anyone with a radio in the area straight to us. Noise is an invitation, and an invitation can become a coffin. So I opened my door and spoke to them like an old man trying to reason with a storm. We traded some dried beans for their promise to not come back for 3 months. They left with knives and a grudging sort of respect. We lived, but only because I chose conversation over the locked barrel of a shotgun. Other encounters have been gentler. Anna, the seamstress, taught me how to make solar stills from old PET bottles and metal sheets pulled from a collapsed billboard. Old Mags traded me a tin of sardines for technical instructions on repairing a broken regulator. Ravi the mechanic invented a pedal pump that can lift shallow water when the battery bank is dead. These alliances matter as much as any ration. They are the scaffolding that keeps small communities from collapsing into smaller, more brutal groups. There are also the caravans, long columns of patched vehicles and bullock carts that move like weather systems across the countryside. Traders keep the veins of this new world open when they can. They move seeds, batteries, old medicines, the kinds of things that keep civilization from slipping entirely into rumor. But caravans are risky. They are ambushed. They break. They get rerouted by storms or banditry. A rumor of a convoy attracts attention like a flare. Last fall, one that was supposed to pass through our valley never came. We waited for 3 days, and then the waiting turned into fear. And the fear trained itself into suspicion. Resources are limited in the blunt ways you already know. Water, rationed, tested, pooled, and guarded. Food, rotated, bartered, grown in shocking smallness. Fuel, a memory that people spend on paying for protection, or save for a funeral and the lights you borrow for it. Medicine, scarce. Antibiotics exist in cans that someone hoards and sells at extortionate prices. We have vaccines that are cold chain dependent, and the cold chain is a fragile promise. If the inverter dies, so does the vaccine. And knowledge, the most undervalued resource, is brittle. People who know how to mend a solar controller, to fix a generator, to inoculate a wound without sending it septic, are priceless. And they are hunted in subtle ways by those who would hoard their skill. I do not pretend to be a scientist, but I read and I listen. We adapted some tactics that are practical and low-tech. We harvest dew and morning condensation with canvas sheets. We cut out shade structures to cool soil and reduce evaporation. We build raised beds and use mulches to keep moisture in. We favor drought-tolerant crops, amaranth, millets, sorghum, plants that laugh at heat the way tomatoes used to cry at it. We practice water triage. Drinking water is sacred. Cooking water is second tier. Washing water is third. You can reuse water in concentric rings. Boil the worst for drinking, and what's left for washing. Use washing water for the garden last. These are not glamorous instructions. They are the plumbing of surviving. We also learn to read the land. A patch of greener shrubs can indicate a shallow groundwater seam. The presence of certain insects after dusk can mean humidity pockets that are worth staking a trap for. A change in bird behavior, a sudden organized departure, can foretell a storm's arrival. I broadcast these observations because they matter. You can survive one more day if you know where a reed grows. If you know how to test a pool for algae and salinity, if you know how to boil rainwater that smells faintly metallic to make it safe enough for a child. But then there are the big, terrifying things. Storms that arrive as walls of dust, enough to sand the skin raw. Atmospheric rivers that drop a year's worth of rainfall in 3 hours and then leave the landscape stripped. Acid downdrafts that poison croplands if you are careless and expose them. Last spring's storm came in from the west with a sound like a freight train. It took roofs, dissolved tarps, and sent our compost piles into the street. I sat on the roof and called names into the static as the whole world tried to fold on itself. We lost 3 people that night. The soil washed down into the riverbed where it formed a new dune and buried the skeleton of a playground. Science matters because understanding gives you an edge. If you know that this winter the Pacific is warmer than the last, you listen for a different kind of storm. If you know the snowpack is thin, you ration earlier. If you know that groundwater extraction is unsustainable at the rate it is being pumped, you start community rules before the pumps die. The problem is not that we lack information, it's that action on that information is expensive and politically difficult. That was the old world's failure. It admitted knowledge, and then did not alter behavior to fit it. The most crippling limitation is scale. Individuals and small communities can do clever things. Solar stills, rain catchers, mulches, barter networks. But systems fail in such a way that small actions are necessary and insufficient. We lack coordinated infrastructure to replace the pipelines and grids that broke. The new world is a mosaic of micro solutions and macro problems. That makes every convoy vital and every cooperative crucial, so we do what we can. On air, I try to be a coordinator of small miracles, who has a spare regulator, who can join a convoy, which road to avoid because the dust slick makes it impassable. What seeds are mature enough to harvest before the heat snaps them? I read out barter lists and the names of people who will take in a child for a month in exchange for ironwork. I relay weather observations gathered by the community. We improvise networks of trust because the old networks fell away. We choose alliances like surgeons choosing sutures, precise and careful. There is an urgency now that feels like a drumbeat. Water tables are falling. Food reserves are averaging down. Fuel is dwindling. Each day a caravan doesn't arrive, we are a fraction smaller. Every storm risks erasing the fragile gains we made that week. The crisis is not one thing. It is a chain of small collapses, linked by scarcity and human decisions. It is systemic failure wearing people as casualties. And yet, I will not pretend there is no path forward. There are salvageable practices, technologies, and habits that, if adopted widely, give us a chance. Local water governance, rationing observed transparently, community seed banks, decentralized generation with maintenance training. These are not glamorous, but they scale sideways rather than upward, and that's what the world needs. The hard truth is that this will be slow, hard work done in small increments. It will require trust, and trust is thin and expensive. Right now, the crisis is coalescing into a new phase. There's talk of a reservoir 3 valleys over, a natural basin that someone claims still fills from snowmelt high on a glacier that stubbornly persists. The rumor has reached my ears through a caravan that passed with a note pinned to the hood. Water, maybe. Scout. The word maybe is the most dangerous word in our vocabulary. It can lift you up into hope and push you off a cliff in the same breath. People are already talking about mobilizing. They might be right. They might be walking into an ambush. They might be walking into salvation. I will broadcast the coordinates and advice as I get them. I will give the science I have and the practical know-how we've learned. I will repeat warnings and whisper promises. That is what I am. A voice that tries to turn rumor into plans and plans into safe movement. I will not pretend I know the outcome. I only know this. Every moment the crisis dulls us or sharpens us, it leans toward one of two futures. Either we continue to fracture under the weight of scarcity, letting the vanishing finish what it started, or we learn to live with less, to coordinate better, to be precise in our kindness. The choice is a weather system in itself, unpredictable, slow-moving, dangerous, but it is still a choice. And until the generator finally gives up and the mic goes cold, I will speak into the night, naming the dangers and the small, practical ways out of them. Because when the crisis is this big, the difference between surviving and not surviving is often the difference between a person who knows and a person who does not. If my words give one person the knowledge to find a vein of water, or the courage to share a ration, then the crisis loses a little of its terror. And so, I keep talking, with the urgency of someone who knows what is at stake and the stubborn, small hope that our next choice might be the one that saves us. They started packing 2 days after the note arrived. The single scrap of paper pinned to the hood of a trader's truck. Water, maybe. I keep a log by the transmitter. The log is practical. Dates, names, weather, who offered what in trade. That log now reads like a mounting drumbeat. The cistern is down to its last tenth. We measure it by the sound the bucket makes when it slips into the dark. Food tins are counted aloud before meals. Batteries are counted like prayers. The generator is a skeleton that needs one more part I don't have. A 12-volt regulator with an intact relay and a fuse that hasn't eaten itself to dust. I could cannibalize a donor unit, but then the donor becomes a corpse, and the choice is moral arithmetic. And I hate arithmetic now. The rising action tastes of metal and fear. The caravan that picked up the note came through on a damp morning. 4-patch trucks, 2 jeeps, a cart with a busted wheel that we lashed together again. People from 3 camps sat on the tailgates and traded stories while they ate. They said the reservoir might be real. A basin behind a crumbling dam, fed by a glacier someone swore still bled meltwater each spring. That was the rumor. That was the maybe. Someone on the caravan had a map with a route scribbled in pencil and an ink blot where the dam should be. They wanted scouts to check it before moving the whole valley. We argued about it on the air in the slot between dusk reports. My voice was steady, but my hands shook. We could send 2 scouts and a mechanic. We could send a dozen strong backs to haul water if it was true. Or we could do nothing and wait for the rumor to die like most rumors do. Doing nothing felt like choosing to watch the well die. People volunteer when the world is made of edges. They imagine heroism when their stomachs are full and their hands are clean. But the valley had been stripped of surplus for months. Every able body had some indispensable function. Anna, with her sewing kit and patience, patched the sunshade and tended the children. Ravi kept the pumps mended. Old Mag scouted for mushrooms and could read a patch of ground like scripture. To send anyone felt like emptying a room and hoping it wouldn't cave. We decided to send 3, Ravi for the pumps and the pedal pump he had newly learned to jury rig. Lena Ortiz, not my Lena, but Lena S., the kid who could ride 2 horses and gut a fish, and Thomas, who had been a trucker before the long dry and knew roads like veins. They left at dawn, loaded light and carrying more questions than water. We watched them go like parents watching a child walk into a storm. 2 days later, knives found us. Raiders come in patterns. They have names and formations. Some are desperate bands looking for food. Others call themselves something fiercer. Dusthawks, the Iron Sun. An organized crew that sets ambushes at choke points and takes what it wants. The first night, the Dusthawks rolled past our outer posts and took a supply crate from the old municipal storehouse. Tins, a crate of dehydrated milk, a coil of garden hose. They left a note scrawled in grease. We take what the weather forgets to give us. It was both threat and declaration. The next morning, 2 men crawled up to the porch and left a different sort of message. A single battery and a tooth. The tooth was painted black. It was meant to be a joke and a warning. We replaced the missing tins with what little we had and tightened the locks. We put up a watch schedule that moved like a slow clock hand through the night. 2 on the roof, 3 by the road, a pair listening for engines. We practiced getting the generator under the tarp in under a minute because we learned quickly that sound is an invitation. The caravan never returned with clear news. Instead, we got a voice on the band, a weak rasping call through static at dawn. Mike, this is Thomas. We ain't saying it's true. There's water, too many tracks. We got shot at. We're at a ravine. Need time. The voice cut like a rope. We spent the rest of that day trying to decode what he meant. Too many tracks meant other parties had beaten them to the route, and that meant competition that could turn violent. Shot at meant people were already willing to kill over the maybe. I remember sitting in the booth and repeating Tomas's plea over and over, because the air demanded a rhythm. My broadcast style is not melodrama, it is supply and demand. But there are moments you can't help but speak as a man, not a coordinator. I told people to hold. I told them the coordinates we had and asked for volunteers to form a protection detail if the convoy decided to return. I read out the names of people who could patch a tire or a radiator. Distant voices called in. A woman with a cracked laugh said she would come with a spare can of fuel. An elder called for temperance. Many did not answer at all. Rumors breed myths in times like these. Branches of the story grew. This reservoir was an engineered basin built in the old days for flood control. This reservoir was natural and fed by a remnant glacier. This was a trap set by a band to draw caravans into ambush. The mind wants a hero and a villain. The landscape likes moral ambiguity. Meanwhile, resources unraveled on the home front. Our water rations slipped from a ½ liter per person to 3/4 between meals. The pantry recorded quiet thefts. A jar of peaches here, a sack of beans there. Small, patient thefts that are more corrosive than a raid. Trust frayed at the edges. People who used to share bread with strangers now watch the doorway like soldiers. I found myself writing a list of rules in block letters and tacking it in the common room. No weapons inside the perimeter. Trades registered publicly. No trading children for fuel. Community oversight rather than secret deals. The internal struggle sits heavy in me. Duty says, send more scouts, coordinate convoys, organize defenses. Fear says, keep everyone here. Conserve what we have. Don't become bait. Guilt sits on top of both. Guilt for sending Ravi. Guilt for not sending the extra can of fuel. Guilt for the nights I slept and someone else went without. I am the voice they hear. They rely on me to be clear and decisive. But the radio cannot carry the full feel of a palm that sweats for decisions. Tension rose another notch when a stranger answered the band in the middle of the night. His message was clipped, measured. He called himself Lantern. He said he represented a group that had been organized, that had maps and a plan, and that they were willing to work with any community that could contribute manpower or supplies. He used the word coordination. That word smells like old governments, like meetings and protocols. The valley has little appetite for protocols. It has appetite for water. Still, Lantern had a way of speaking that sounded like a promise. He said their base was 2 days beyond the ravine, that they had wells and a sustained source if you could get to them. He promised protection in exchange for shared management. Lantern's call split the room. Some saw salvation. Some saw a well-written con. Anna wanted to knit a liaison shirt and go. Old Mags wanted to check the map and hold back. We debated on air, and the debate itself became a kind of thermometer for the valley. We were a people measuring our fever in public. Then Lena S. called. Her voice came in ragged but alive. "Mike," she said, "we found something. Not big, not a lake, but a trickle in a basin with stones that taste clean. There's a camp there, Smoke. It's watched." Her breath was shallow. "They set snares. They have solar. They have a watchman with a bright scar. He counts us." The fact of the water was neither glorious nor small. It was an edge. It needed translation into logistics. How much? How deep? Could we pump it? Were there poisons? Could we move a convoy without alerting every hungry mouth within 5 days' march? I spoke to Ravi that evening, his voice a gravel road. "How's the pump?" I asked. "It's the pedal," he said. "Works when the shaft isn't too hot. We can lift a bucket every 30 seconds if the shaft holds. But that's a trickle for a village. For a valley, we need a seizure pump, a proper head, and a feed line. We got no PVC, we got no seals. We got string and stubbornness." Stubbornness is a resource, I thought. But stubbornness can't move a radiator or seal a pipe. It can bolt two things together and hope they hold under pressure. We cannibalized equipment. We sent out runners to find a radiator core and a length of pipe. We bartered a portion of our seed stash for a spool of insulated wire. People gave, because there was a future in the maybe. Giving is both a leap of faith and a strategic investment. The Dusthawks, sensing movement like wolves scenting a stampede, increased patrols. Their tactics were fluid. Burn one outpost, pretend to withdraw, then return under cover of darkness with ropes and ladders. We mounted a defense that looked like a patchwork of bravery. A noisemaker on the west ridge. A cracked water tank rolled into a trench to slow vehicles. A line of scare flags that flapped and made 1,000 threatening noises by wind. We trained people in small, effective defensive behaviors. How to block an engine with a bollard. How to night ambush with slings and thermal blankets to hide infrared. How to ring a bell if someone tries to cross the line. Practical, ugly, and necessary. On the third week, the ravine place, where Thomas had last called, sent back a radio voice that was less sure. A panicked whisper came through at dawn. "Mike, they followed us. Hundreds. We're pinned. Lantern didn't show. Static swallowed the rest." The valley went quiet in a way that felt like sleep. We counted our breaths and rationed our panic. Trust becomes the currency that decides who lives. Some people began to hoard information. You could tell by the way they answered on the band, clipped, leaving out details, swapping exact coordinates for vague headings. Others partnered in dangerous ways, making pacts with a caravan they barely trusted because the caravan promised rifles. Moral calculus grew fat with complexity. I tried to be a referee on the air, disclose, coordinate, insist on transparency. I read names aloud of who would take responsibility for shared actions. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it merely postponed the inevitable argument. The mystery tightened edges as more voices claimed to have seen the basin. A woman with a cracked clarinet said it was a spring with fish bones. A man with 3 missing teeth said the watchman was an ex-soldier who asked for a map. Lantern reappeared on the band, soft this time. "We can protect a route if the valley commits to a guard rotation. We require 40% of the water harvested to be reserved for caravans that run between basins. That's how we fund patrols." The offer smelled like a tax. It smelled like shelter for service. Some agreed immediately. Others recoiled. Internal struggle is a slow erosion. I find myself thinking of the person I was who could make decisions without carrying the weight of 24 families. I think of the nights my daughter listened to my voice and learned to hope for a radio song. I think of how easy it would be to stop speaking and let people make their own choices in the dark. But silence is its own kind of violence. The band becomes a table where we lay out the few options we have and try not to stab each other with them. We practice contingency plans. We tested the pedal pump until my calves ached and my vision blurred. We staged dummy convoys to see who would shadow us. We trained a small medical team to treat puncture wounds and heat stroke. I started broadcasting not only logistics, but also psychological cues. Keep routines, write names, tape messages on trees so a traveling thief cannot gaslight the community into believing someone else is the thief. We rehearsed telling the children stories to keep their minds from unspooling. Little things mattered. The rising action is now a coil, wound tighter with each decision. We are on the brink of movement, an organized caravan, a disputed basin, an offer from Lantern that might be protection or extortion, raiders sharpening their teeth. and a valley that must choose between staying and starving, or moving and gambling on salvation. The storm that finally arrived did not announce itself with thunder. It came as a smell, damp, at first a rumour, and then a low swell of warmth that made the dust feel dense and heavy. Distant lightning mirrored the tension in our chests, bright, brief, dangerous. We read the sky in a new language. We strapped down the generator and readied the pedal pump. We patched the trailers and counted the kids, the elders, the brittle pets we vowed not to abandon. Before anyone could make a final decision, the band hummed with a voice I did not recognize, a call sign that announced itself like a drumbeat. "This is the Northwestern Relay. We can confirm a flow. Coordinates attached. Approach with caution." The voice was solid. No lantern flattery. No dusthawk menace. It sounded like someone who had seen rivers die and come back and die again. It sounded like someone who knew the price of a maybe. The valley took a collective breath. The rising action had become a cliff. People sharpened tools, packed rations, rehearsed goodbyes. I wrote names on slips of paper and tucked them into my notebook, a small charm against the vanishing. I spoke into the mic and read the coordinates aloud, listened for responses, and tried to stitch us together with sound. Trust and doubt sat on either shoulder, hunger on my belly, the radio's warmth under my palms, the road out ahead and the question of whether the maybe would bend towards salvation or collapse into the same dust that had eaten the rest of our world. We chose to move. Not everyone, not all at once. We chose to send a defended convoy to the basin, carrying pumps, pipes, and the people who knew how to use them. We chose to trust a man named Lantern with a caveat. Our radios would be on, and our people would watch. Practical clauses for practical people. The rising action holds its breath. The valley is packed like a fist around a fragile seed. We step into motion because motion is sometimes better than waiting to be taken. We step into motion because the maybe has become a promise we can no longer ignore. And as the convoy rolls toward the ravine, dust kicking up like old ghosts, I keep the microphone close and my voice steady, because people need a cadence to follow. They need a voice to tell them when to stop, when to run, when to hold. I am that voice. For better or worse, I will not stop calling names into the dark. The convoy reached the basin at dusk, engines low, wheels dragging through dust that had not seen rain in a generation. We were a procession of patched steel and bone-tired flesh, scavenged trucks, mule carts, and a handful of bicycles with chains oiled in animal fat. Lantern had promised a flow. Lena had sworn on her breath that she'd seen water, and the Northwestern Relay had stamped it with coordinates. The whole valley, it seemed, had been holding its lungs for this one moment. I was in the lead truck, the transmitter lashed to the dash, and the mic in my lap. Every bump rattled the casing, and I kept a hand over it like a father shielding a child. My role was simple: broadcast back what we found. Simple and impossible. The basin opened before us like a scar cut into the land. Once, it had been a reservoir. The remains of a dam still jutted out, teeth of concrete gnawed by time and storms. Below, in the shadow of those broken teeth, there was movement. At first, I thought it was the trick of failing light, the way heat warped vision. But then I saw it. A glimmer, a thin vein of silver running between stones. Water, not much. Not a river or a lake, but more than a puddle, more than a tease, a seepage from some buried source, slipping through a cracked wall of shale and pooling in a hollow that reflected the last fire of the sunset. People gasped. Some fell to their knees as though praying. Others didn't wait. They rushed forward, dropping cups, helmets, even their bare hands into the trickle. I caught myself leaning toward the door, my throat aching at the thought of swallowing something clean. And then I saw the smoke. Not campfire smoke. This was thicker, darker, too intentional. Rising from the ridge to our right, it curled like a signal, a flare without fire. Whoever it was, they'd been waiting for us. The first shot cracked across the basin. The sound bounced off stone, sharp and wrong in the hush. A man at the water fell, clutching his leg, screaming into the dirt. The rest scattered, diving for cover behind the trucks, hauling children beneath carts. Panic is loud, and once it begins, it feeds itself. I gripped the mic. "Under fire," I said, voice level despite the thudding in my chest. Northridge. Hostiles present. Hold cover. Do not, repeat, do not stampede the basin. It wasn't raiders, not in the way we knew them. These weren't dusthawks or bandits. As figures emerged from the ridge, their movements were disciplined, their rifles clean. They had mismatched uniforms, but they moved like soldiers. Lantern soldiers, one of them called out through a bullhorn, words echoing across the basin. You drink under our guard, or you don't drink at all. So the myth was true, not just the water, but the strings attached. Lantern had baited us into his hand. Protection, he'd said. Coordination. But the price was submission. 40%, he'd demanded. Now, with barrels trained on us, it wasn't 40%, it was everything. The basin became a crucible. People shouted over one another, some begging to surrender, others snarling that we'd fight to the death. Mothers held their children tighter. Men checked the chambers of their few rusting weapons. I knew with the clarity of terror that one wrong word from me could tip the balance, into slaughter or into chains. The second turning point came as the sky began to move. At first, I thought it was dusk settling in strange patterns. Then I saw the horizon. A wall of roiling brown, thick as tar, swallowing the last orange light. A dust storm, bigger than anything I'd seen. The wind carried its herald before it. A hot blast that stung the skin and rattled the truck windows. The basin was about to be buried. The enemy froze too. Even trained men fear the breath of the desert when it rises in fury. Their rifles lowered slightly, eyes flicking to the oncoming wall. For a heartbeat, the world hung in suspension. Us at the water, them on the ridge, and death itself rolling toward all of us without discrimination. It was then that I made the choice. Listen, I shouted into the mic, but I also shouted across the open air, voice raw and breaking. None of us lives through that storm alone. You can pull your triggers, or you can help us dig in. Decide fast. No one moved. The storm ate half the horizon now. Its roar like 1,000 furnaces. I could feel grit already peppering my face, sliding into my teeth. The water at the basin's floor rippled, turning to mud as the wind licked at it. I remembered my daughter's face, the way she used to sit in front of the radio and mimic my words like it was a game. I remembered Ravi pedaling his pump until his legs bled. I remembered Anna's patience, Lena's stubborn fire, Thomas's ragged... The valley shouted behind me. Curses, warnings, desperate pleas. But I kept moving until I stood between our people and Lantern's soldiers. The wind clawed at my jacket, dust already darkening the edges of the world. You shoot now, I called to the ridge. And the storm buries you with us. You help us, and maybe we all crawl out. Your choice. For a moment I thought they would kill me anyway. Fingers tightened on triggers. A bead of red light danced on my chest. And then a shout muffled in the storm's first scream. One of them waved his arms, pointing to the shattered dam wall. A gesture, shelter. The decision snapped like a chain breaking. Lantern's soldiers scrambled down from the ridge, barking orders. Our people hesitated, then followed. In the roar of the storm's advance, friend and foe blurred into the same frantic mass, hauling tarps, dragging wounded, packing the children into the old spillway beneath the dam. The dust storm hit like the world ending. It wasn't just wind and grit. It was weight, a suffocating darkness that turned day into pitch. Sand-battered skin raw, found its way into eyes, mouths, lungs. The roar drowned every scream, every command. I tasted blood with every breath. Inside the spillway, bodies pressed against bodies. Strangers clinging to enemies. All of us reduced to the same fragile fact. Survival. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time was shredded in the storm. All I know is that when it finally began to thin, when the air lightened enough to see the faint outline of a face, we were still alive. Not all. Some had suffocated. Some had been lost to the dark. But enough. And beside us, alive too, were Lantern's soldiers. We looked at one another in the settling dust, eyes hollow, skin caked with earth. No one reached for their guns. No one spoke of percentages or control. In that silence, I understood something cruel and beautiful. The world was not offering us choices anymore. It was offering us chances, fragile, fleeting, razor-edged chances. We had found water. We had found enemies who had become, at least for a night, fellow survivors. And I had found, somewhere in the hollow of my chest, a truth I could no longer deny. Survival wasn't about hoarding, or fighting, or standing tallest. It was about deciding, again and again, to be human, even when the storm tried to strip that from you. As the dust settled and the basin revealed itself again, scarred, muddy, but alive, I picked up the mic with hands that shook less than I expected. My voice was cracked but steady. "This is Mike Harrington," I said. "Reporting. We made it through. Water confirmed. Survivors confirmed. The storm has passed, for now." I let the silence ride the airwaves for a long time before adding the only words that mattered. "We're still here." The basin was quiet when the storm lifted. Not silent. Nothing in this world was ever truly silent anymore, but quieter than I had expected. The wind still dragged long fingers of dust across the ground, but the roar was gone, leaving only the faint rasp of settling sand and the hoarse coughing of survivors. I pulled myself upright, my back stiff from hours pressed against the cold concrete of the spillway wall. My throat burned raw, every swallow a knife edge, but I was alive. We were alive, not all of us. I counted quickly, my eyes sweeping the faces that remained. Too many gaps, too many bodies that hadn't stirred when the storm passed. The earth had claimed them quietly. No drama, no struggle. Just the simple truth that lungs cannot fight against choking dust forever. Children whimpered, clinging to parents' legs. Men and women, both ours and lanterns, staggered out of the spillway, blinking against the pale dawn light. They looked like one people now, indistinguishable in their coating of grit, their torn clothing, their haunted eyes. For a moment, the lines that divided us felt like nothing but a rumor. The water was still there. That was the strangest thing of all. I expected the storm to bury it, to choke the seep dry, to grind the basin to dust again. But through the wreckage, through the mud and scattered debris, a thin ribbon still gleamed at the base of the shale wall. Smaller, weaker, but alive. A vein of silver refusing to die. Hope, stubborn as a weed. Lantern soldiers gathered in a tight circle on the ridge where the storm had first revealed them. Their leader, a tall man with a scar down his cheek, looked over the basin with unreadable eyes. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't bark commands. He just watched, weighing. I felt every gaze in our camp turn toward me, as if survival had elected me judge, jury, and herald. I had walked into the storm on their behalf. Now they waited for me to tell them what it meant. I didn't. No, all I knew was that we had drunk from the edge of extinction and found ourselves still breathing. The aftermath was messy. We spent hours pulling bodies from the spillway, laying them in neat rows on higher ground. Some we knew by name. Tomas, whose radio voice had once filled the valley. Esther, who'd carried her baby for miles only to leave it motherless in the storm. Others were strangers, faces we'd only met in the scramble for shelter. Death didn't ask for introductions. I forced myself to help, to carry, to cover the faces, to speak the names aloud where they were known. The weight of each body pressed the truth deeper into me. Survival had a cost, and it was always paid in flesh. The living were restless. Thirst clawed at them, louder now that water shimmered in front of us. But no one dared to approach, not with Lantern's men standing guard, rifles slung across their chests. It was a standoff without words, us on one side, them on the other, the trickle of water between. The scarred leader finally broke the silence. "You made a choice," he said, his voice rough, like gravel rolled in his throat. "You could have fought, you could have died. Instead you spoke." I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice yet. "You'll drink," he continued. "So will we, but not as masters and slaves. Not tonight. The storm has a way of leveling men." He spat into the dirt. "Tomorrow maybe we talk terms. Tonight we share what we can." It wasn't peace. It wasn't alliance. But it was survival. Fragile, conditional, unpromised. That was enough. We cupped hands and battered helmets and passed what little water we could carry between groups. Children first, then the wounded. It wasn't much. Just enough to wet lips, to ease cracked tongues. Just enough to remind us what hope tasted like. And as I drank, cool liquid burning down my throat, I thought, maybe this is what it means to rebuild. Not walls, not cities, but trust. One swallow at a time. Night fell, heavy and unkind. The storm had stripped the basin bare, erasing tracks, crushing tents, scattering supplies into the endless dark. We huddled close, building fires from whatever scraps we salvaged. The flames painted faces in flickering gold. Tired, scarred, but alive. I sat apart, transmitter in my lap. My fingers brushed the mic again and again, restless. Should I speak? Should I tell the valley what we'd found? That the myth of water was real, but chained to Lantern's grip? That the storm had forced us into uneasy kinship with those we once called enemies? What truth did I owe them? My daughter's memory haunted me. I could almost hear her voice again, small and eager, pretending to announce news into the static. "We're still here," she'd say, as if the words alone could build a shelter. I pressed the mic. My voice came soft but steady. "This is Mike Harrington, reporting from the basin. The storm has passed. We've lost too many, but not all. Water remains. Survivors remain. For tonight, that is enough." I let the silence carry the rest. I didn't mention Lantern's men, not yet. That truth would come later, when I had the words to carry it. By morning, the air had changed. It was subtle, but I felt it as I stepped outside the spillway ruins. The dust had settled, leaving the world sharper. The sky, though pale and streaked with ash, held a clarity I hadn't seen in months. The storm had scoured the valley raw. But in its wake, the land smelled. Almost clean, I bent to the ground. Tiny flecks of green clung stubbornly at the edges of rocks, half-buried sprouts no taller than a nail. Grass or weeds? It didn't matter. Life was life. For the first time in a long while, I wondered if the earth wasn't entirely finished with us. Maybe, beneath the choking layers of dust, it was still trying to breathe. The basin's water gleamed faintly in the dawn light. More people had gathered now, cautious but less fearful. They cupped water in palms, passing it carefully. Some laughed through cracked lips. Others simply wept. I watched them, and I felt something shift in me. For so long I had believed survival meant reporting the facts, holding the world accountable, keeping the truth alive in the dark. But the storm had stripped even that certainty. When night came again, I sat with the transmitter under the stars. They were faint, blurred by dust, but still there. Pinpricks of stubborn light, refusing to die. I pressed the mic, speaking not just to the valley, but to the silence between the stars. "We found something," I said. "Not just water, not just survival. Something harder, something stranger, maybe a chance." The word hung in the air, fragile as glass. I don't know if the world is healing, or if it's only getting worse. But I know this: the storm didn't take us, not all of us. And as long as one voice still speaks, as long as one hand still reaches for another, the story isn't over. I paused, looking at the faint green shoots clinging to the rocks, at the basin, where enemies and friends both drank from the same trickle. "We're still here," I whispered, and let the static carry it away. The days after the storm bled into each other, a slow trickle of moments measured in sips of water and the shifting of ash beneath our feet. Nothing about the basin was safe. Lantern's men still loomed across the ridge, the water still only a fragile stream. But it was something. In this world, something was more than we'd had in years. I sat with the transmitter each night, the soft hum of the generator filling the silence. My voice drifted into the static, not knowing if anyone still listened, not knowing if the world beyond the valley even existed anymore. But I spoke. "This is Mike Harrington," I'd say, "reporting from what remains." Sometimes I told them the facts. The storm had passed, the water still flowed, our dead were buried. Other times I told them the small things, that I'd seen the first green sprout in months, that a child in camp had laughed, loud enough to make us all forget our hunger for one. Heartbeat. Those moments mattered, more than the rest. I've come to realize something I never did back when the world was still bright and whole. Survival isn't about winning. It isn't about defeating storms or enemies or hunger. It's about endurance, about holding on to the smallest thread of hope when everything else is stripped away. Lantern's men still stand with rifles slung, their leader watching me with the same unreadable eyes. I don't know what he's planning, if tomorrow he'll turn on us, if the water will become a battlefield again. But tonight, his people and ours drink from the same trickle. That's not peace. But it's not war either, and in this world, that's a kind of victory. The basin isn't salvation. It's not the answer to every prayer whispered into static, but it's proof. Proof that myths can hold truth, that rumors can lead to water, that the earth hasn't given up on us completely. Maybe that's enough. I think often of my daughter, of how she used to press her lips to the old mic, pretending she was a broadcaster. "Stay tuned," she'd say, her voice bright with a confidence I no longer remember how to feel. "Stay alive. We'll be right back." She's gone now. The world took her like it's taken so much, but her words remain. They echo in me each time I press the mic, each time I send my voice into the static. I can't bring her back, but I can carry her promise. The sky is changing. It's still dust-stained, still heavy with scars, but every now and then, in the thin sliver before dawn, I swear I see blue. Not much, just a hint, pale and fleeting, but it's there, and maybe that's what hope is in the end. Not a flood of light, not the return of the world we lost, but a fragile shade of color against the ash. Something worth looking for. We are not healed. We are not safe, but we are here, and that matters. So if anyone out there is listening, if any radios still crackle, if any hands still clutch antennas to the sky, hear me now. Don't stop. Don't stop searching, or building, or fighting for whatever scraps of tomorrow you can find. Don't stop believing that life can cling to the edges, even when the center is gone. The world might not forgive us. It may never return to what it was, but we're still breathing, and as long as we are, there's a chance. It doesn't have to be more than that. A chance is enough. I'll keep the signal alive as long as I can. I'll keep speaking, keep reminding the silence that humanity isn't finished yet. If all I leave behind is a voice in the static, then let it carry this truth. We're still here. Stay alive. Stay human. The world may be broken, but the story isn't over. Not yet.